She was 43, I was 20. After my father's heart stopped beating, I found a box of condoms and a long, fresh cucumber lying next to my stepmother's bed. What I did next wasn't what you might expect, but it changed everything, and it started with a silence that was louder than any words we could have spoken. Hello, everyone. If this is your first time here, welcome. We tell the kinds of stories that get buried in the quiet corners of life. If you believe that the most powerful connections are often the ones we never speak of, please take a moment to subscribe and press 1 in the comments below to let us know you're with us on this journey. My name is Nathan, and at 20 years old, I was a sophomore psychology major navigating a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. My father was gone. I hadn't planned on staying in our small Dayton, Ohio home long after the funeral, but I did. My stepmother, Linda, never asked me to stay, but she never told me to leave either. The house, once filled with the mundane symphony of my father's life, the morning radio, the clink of his coffee cup, his footsteps on the stairs, had fallen into a profound silence. It wasn't just empty, it was cavernous, each room echoing with a presence that was no longer there. People in a town like Dayton think they know everyone's business. The truth is, they don't know a thing. They just fill in the blanks with their own fears and judgments. Linda was the only woman my father had truly loved after my own mother passed away when I was a child. She had never tried to be my mother. She understood that was a role no one could fill. Instead, she just was. A quiet, steady presence in the background of my life. In the weeks that followed the funeral, Linda and I became like ghosts haunting our own home. We were two shadows gliding past each other in the hallways, our movements careful, our gazes averted. We exchanged few words, our interactions limited to the bare necessities. The grief was a physical entity in the house, a room with a light so blindingly bright that neither of us dared to open the door. So, we lived around it, tiptoeing along its edges. Linda stopped wearing the vibrant floral dresses my father had loved, but she didn't resign herself to perpetual black. She existed in a muted palette of grays and navies. I still took my long hot baths in the evenings, a habit from my childhood, but the tunes I used to hum were silenced, trapped in my throat. Our communication became a series of unspoken gestures, a language only the two of us could understand. She would set a plate for my father at the dinner table every night for a week, pulling out his chair before she caught herself, her hand hovering in the empty air. I never commented. I simply cleared the plate later when she wasn't looking. I started leaving a bottle of my father's favorite wine on the kitchen counter. Even though neither of us drank it, it was a shared acknowledgement of the void. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the windowsills like powdered sugar, I found Linda standing motionless in front of the refrigerator. She stared at a single bottle of water for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. She wasn't reaching for it, she was just frozen, as if the simple act of making a decision was a mountain too high to climb. I didn't ask what was wrong. I walked over, poured a glass of water from the tap, and set it on the counter beside her. Then I left the room. The next morning, the glass was in the dishwasher, clean and waiting. In that silent exchange, a fragile trust was forged. We were learning to see each other's pain without having to name it. I commuted to my college classes 3 times a week, a welcome escape into a world of theories and case studies, but I always came back. I never told my friends I was living alone with my stepmother. It wasn't out of shame, but because I couldn't bear their questions, the way their whys would try to dissect something so delicate and undefined. Linda never pried about my life at school. There were no questions about exams or grades. But every night I came home late, I would find a container in the fridge with a carefully wrapped portion of food, usually my favorite dish. It was her way of saying, "I see you. I know you're tired." In return, I started tending to the house in my father's place. I kept a stock of cold medicine in the cabinet. I'd leave new novels I thought she might like on the living room bookshelf. Sometimes a simple note. The heater in the basement was making a noise. I fixed it. We were building a life not on conversation, but on consideration. We never spoke my father's name, but his presence was the invisible scaffolding around which we constructed our days. She kept his newspaper subscription active, the fresh paper laid on the kitchen table each morning, unread. I kept the radio on during breakfast. The volume turned so low it was just a whisper of music, a ghost of our former mornings. This quiet existence was our pact, a form of polite, shared grief. It was our way of surviving. But the outside world, with its loud assumptions, couldn't comprehend it. The first rumor I heard hit me like a physical blow. I was at a corner coffee shop waiting for my order when I overheard a man hiss to his friend, a grown son living with his stepmother. "Something's not right there," the other man snickered. "No one lives like that unless there's something else going on." My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to turn, to scream at them that they knew nothing of loss, nothing of the quiet, desperate ways people cling to the familiar wreckage of their lives. But I didn't. I just stood there, the anger slowly dissolving into a profound weariness. I was tired of people needing to cram every human experience into a neat, labeled box. Tired of the world dictating that grief had to follow a specific timeline and a set of prescribed behaviors. That evening, I came home to find Linda arranging flowers in a vase, the first time she'd done so since the funeral. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her slender fingers move among the stems. Without turning around, she asked, her voice soft, "Would you like some tea?" "Yes," I said. We sat in the living room and drank our tea in a comfortable silence. It wasn't the tense, fragile silence of the early days. This was different. It was a silence of acceptance. And in that moment, I realized we weren't just coexisting to endure the pain. We were anchoring each other, keeping one another from drifting too far out into the lonely sea of sorrow. We didn't need to tell each other we were okay. We were proving it, day by day, with our quiet, resilient presence. Some relationships don't need a name. They just need enough time and enough silence to grow. Our bond deepened in these small, unspoken ways. There were no grand gestures, no tearful hugs, no long evenings spent laughing in front of the television. Yet we were there for each other in a way that sometimes even blood relatives cannot manage. I started finding little notes left on the kitchen table. "There are waffles in the freezer. Remember to take some if you're going to be late." The words were simple, but it was the handwriting that caught my attention. She wrote the word "you" with a deliberate, almost practiced clarity, as if she was relearning how to care for someone else. I began leaving my own notes in reply. "Coffee maker was acting up." "I fixed the filter." Or, "The weather report says it's going to rain all week. Don't forget your umbrella." These scraps of paper became our private language, a bridge between two people who were no longer strangers but hadn't yet dared to become family. Every morning, I would see her standing at the kitchen window, sipping her tea and gazing out at the yard. I never knew what she was thinking, and I never asked. But I made sure the kettle was full of hot water before I left for the day. She never said thank you, but the kettle was always washed and back in its spot when I returned. Slowly, carefully, we were learning how to exist together without reopening the wound. I began the arduous task of clearing out my father's study. It wasn't about erasing his memory, but about letting the present breathe. I wanted to make space for something new, for the life that had to continue. Linda never questioned what I was doing, but I knew she saw. For the first time in nearly a year, I saw her open the window in that room, pulling back the heavy curtains to let the sunlight stream in. One evening, as I was folding a blanket in the living room, she appeared in the doorway of the study. She was holding one of my father's old flannel shirts. "This," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Could you keep it? If not, I'll put it away." I took the shirt from her hands. Its familiar weight felt both comforting and heavy. "I'll keep it," I said, folding it carefully. She gave a small, grateful nod and disappeared back into her room. We stood in our separate spaces, the only sound the gentle hum of the house. But we had crossed another invisible line. From that day forward, Linda began to cook more often. Not full meals every day, but small offerings, extended with a casualness that belied their significance. "I made some corn chowder. Are you allergic to anything?" Or, "I'm going to bake some bread. Would you like a loaf?" I always said yes, not because I was hungry, but because I understood the invitation was a question. "Are you still willing to share this space with me?" We never lingered long at the table, but sometimes, as I washed the dishes, she would share a small fragment of her life before my father. "I worked in a used bookstore when I was younger," she said once, her eyes distant. "The old books there had a smell like wood smoke and thyme, a smell they don't put in books anymore." I didn't ask her why she was telling me this now. I just listened, nodding, my hands submerged in the warm, soapy water. "I get it," I said, and I did. Life continued in this gentle rhythm. What do you think, everyone? Is it possible for two people to build a family out of shared silence and quiet gestures? Press 1 in the comments if you think some bonds are stronger for being unspoken. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion to our story. In life, certain moments, lasting no more than a few seconds, can detonate everything you thought you knew about a person. My moment came on a cool evening in early spring. My seasonal allergies were acting up, my eyes itchy and red. I remembered an old bottle of eye drops, which I vaguely recalled leaving in a laundry basket. Linda often gathered the laundry, and I figured the bottle must have accidentally ended up in her room. The house was wrapped in its usual nightly quiet, broken only by the steady thrum of the furnace in the basement. I knocked softly on her door. No answer. Assuming she was asleep, I gently pushed the door open, intending only to retrieve the medicine and slip back out unnoticed. Her bedside lamp cast a soft, golden glow across the room. The bed was empty, the blankets neatly folded back. Everything was in its place. I scanned the room and my eyes fell on the small nightstand. And then I saw it. Lying atop a half-read novel was an opened box of condoms. Next to it, laid casually, was a long, fresh cucumber. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, charged with a secret I was never meant to know. This wasn't just Linda's bedroom anymore. It was a forbidden space, a wall of wind I had just walked through. I wasn't shocked in a prurient way. I wasn't disgusted or panicked. A single, profound thought cut through the silence in my mind. Linda is alive. She had needs, desires, and a life that existed behind this closed door. A life I had never once considered. I had always seen her through the filter of my own grief. Linda, the quiet widow. Linda, the patient stepmother. I had unconsciously confined her to a role, a stereotype of the calm, self-sacrificing, desexualized woman who exists only to maintain the rhythm of a grieving household. I forgot she had been a wife, a lover, a woman with a body and a heart that still beat with its own needs. What I saw on that nightstand didn't shatter my image of her. It shattered the narrow frame through which I had been viewing her. It woke me up. I backed out of the room as silently as I had entered and closed the door, the soft click echoing in the hallway. I never found the eye drops. I went to my own room, but sleep was impossible. The image was burned into my mind, not with judgment, but with a startling sense of revelation. The shame I felt wasn't for what she had done, but for my own limited perception. I was ashamed that I had, on some level, believed she had no right to a life of her own. The next morning, the fragile truce of our silence was tested. She was in the kitchen, making breakfast, just like any other day. She didn't look at me differently. I washed the dishes. We made small talk about the weather. Not a word about the night before, but I knew she knew. There was an infinitesimal tension in the air, a question hanging between us that neither of us would dare to ask. And in that shared avoidance, I understood she didn't need an explanation or an apology. We both chose to let the moment exist, contained within its own silence. From that day on, I saw her. I really saw her, not as a functionary in my life, but as a complete person. A 43-year-old woman, a woman who was lonely but also resilient, a woman who was still growing, still yearning, and just as deserving of life and pleasure as anyone else. When she asked me later that day, "Would you like some more orange juice?" I smiled, a genuine smile, for the first time in a long time. "Yes, Mom," I said. The word fell from my lips with an ease it had never had before. It was no longer a formality, but an acknowledgement of our new, unspoken understanding, an acceptance without prejudice, without conditions. We never spoke of what I saw, not because it was unimportant, but because some things are shown more respect when they are kept quiet. I realized that not all boundaries need to be drawn with words. Sometimes, the most profound respect you can show someone is to see their full humanity and simply look away. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes, the thing that should make us ashamed isn't the behavior of others, but our own assumption that they had no right to it." The next day, I found her on the porch. "Let's go somewhere," I said. "Maybe the beach." Just for a few days, a change of scenery. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a gentle surprise, softer than I had ever seen them. "You mean a trip?" I smiled. "Let's just go." No explanations were needed, no promises were made. A quiet event had transpired, and though we never spoke of it, things would never be the same again. The sea breeze that greeted us was a world away from the stagnant air of our quiet house. It carried the scent of salt, distance, and something akin to forgiveness. We arrived at a small coastal town late one afternoon, checking into a modest cottage that overlooked the ocean. Linda had packed light, a few simple outfits, a novel, sunscreen. That evening, after a simple dinner on the cottage's wooden deck, Linda grabbed a thin blanket. "Let's go down to the water," she suggested. "Sim." The moon was a silver disk in the dark sky, casting a shimmering path across the waves. We found a spot on the cool sand and sat, a comfortable distance between us. "It's been a long time since I heard the ocean at night," she said, her voice mingling with the rhythmic crash of the waves. "When was the last time?" I asked gently. She was quiet for a long moment. "The last time I came here was with your father." The wind picked up, tugging at the corners of our blanket. I felt a weight in my chest, not of sadness, but of responsibility. I had to say it, not to free her, but to give her permission to free herself. I took a deep breath. "Mom," I started, my voice steady. "You don't have to live inside that role forever." She turned to look at me, her eyes luminous in the moonlight. "I'm a grown man now," I continued. "I can take care of myself. You don't have to spend your life making sure I'm stable." "I don't want you to sacrifice anything else for me." Her gaze shifted back to the endless horizon. The waves sighed against the shore. I didn't push. I had laid the words at her feet. It was up to her if she wanted to pick them up. Finally, she let out a long, slow breath. "There's a part of me that died with him, Nathan. For the longest time, I thought that part would never wake up again." "I understand that," I said softly. "But the rest of you is still alive, and that part doesn't need anyone's permission to keep going." We sat in silence for a long time after that, two solitary figures against the vastness of the ocean. The wind grew colder, and Linda pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "If I did start over," she asked, her voice tentative, "would you be angry?" A small smile touched my lips. "No," I said. "I'd be proud, because I know how hard it is for someone to dare to live again after they've lost everything." She didn't say anything more, but in the darkness, I felt her hand shift on the sand, a fraction of an inch closer to mine. We didn't need a hug. We didn't need a dramatic catharsis. We just needed this quiet agreement, an unspoken pact that from this moment on, a new beginning was possible, one that didn't require stepping over the memory of the dead or denying the love that had once been. That night, before she went to bed, Linda paused at my open door. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, "for seeing me as a real person." "You always were," I replied. "I just finally grew up enough to see it." Our trip lasted only 3 days. No dramatic turning points occurred, just two wounded souls quietly giving each other the space to breathe again. When we returned home, the house felt different, or perhaps we were different. The unspoken understanding between us had solidified. It was time for a change. I started quietly looking for apartments near my campus. Linda started clearing out the guest room, donating old clothes. We were preparing for a farewell that never needed to be announced. The morning I left, before the sun rose, I didn't wake her. There were no tears, no prolonged goodbyes. I just left a note on the kitchen table, next to the teapot that was still warm. "Thank you, Mom, for not holding on to me and for teaching me how to hold on to myself." We didn't break apart. A chapter had simply and gently closed. 3 years passed. I finished my degree, got a job in a city a few hours away, and built a life of my own. Then, one June morning, I got a text from our old neighbor. "Linda's lavender garden is thriving. She has someone who helps her water it now." I drove back. The house looked the same, but it felt alive in a way it never had before. Linda met me at the gate, her hair cut shorter, a bright smile on her face. We sat on the porch with tea, just like old times. From the corner of my eye, I saw a kind-faced, middle-aged man tending to the lavender bushes. He looked over, smiled at Linda, and gave me a respectful nod. I nodded back. No introductions were needed. "You were right, Nathan," Linda said, her eyes following the man in the garden. I didn't have to live the rest of my life in silence. My heart felt full, not with sadness for what was lost, but with gratitude for what had been found. We had needed each other to survive our grief, and then we had needed to let each other go in order to truly live. Our story wasn't a tragedy or a romance. It was a story of transition, from loss to rebirth, from dependence to freedom. We learn that sometimes the deepest form of love isn't holding on, but knowing precisely when to let go. Thank you for listening to this story. Life doesn't end when a chapter closes, it just changes our role in the story. We go from being a character who stays to one who blesses from afar. If this story touched you, and if you believe that healing often happens in the quiet spaces, press 1 in the comments. We are so grateful to have you here. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to start over.